It's still pretty much in the stage it was in from the last time I discussed it at TAFE, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more interest from Western distributors, promoters, things like that. So it's definitely made its mark. It's coming up on a lot of people's radar. We just had a very big Psych Fest, Austin Psych Fest show with one of the bands, Choi Wan, CHUI Wan, WAN, Choi Wan. That gig, that one performance in Austin, Texas, had a lot of impact. You know, after that 45 minutes was up, suddenly 10,000 people knew who that band was and liked them. Cool. So they were kind of like the hidden surprise of the whole thing. Tame Impala headlined, so did Spiritualized and Flaming Lips and Jesus and Mary Chain, but you know, the band everyone was raving about was the little band from Beijing I brought along. So there you go. Because that was the surprise, you see. They were like, who are these Chinese kids? They're tearing it up. I mean, everyone was dancing. It was off the hook. It was undeniable. It was like, we pulled a bit of a coup there. And so, you know, things are going better than we had hoped, I think, at this point. You know, we've got offers on the table from international distributors. We've got offers for tours in different countries around the world. It's a thing. It's a thing, and there's just no getting around that. Actually, through a Chinese-Australian friend of mine who goes back and forth, and he came back one time with a suitcase full of CDs from China, and he just laid it all on me. He was like, you got to hear all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, he's being a bit obnoxious about it. But he was right. I did need to hear it. And after I heard it, I said, how do I find out more about this? And he said, I'll put you in touch with these people, this guy in Sydney and this guy in Beijing. So it's just got a dialogue happening with these guys. And through that, the suggestion was made, just send me a box of, you know, maybe 20 different albums, 5 or 10 copies of each. And, you know, being a touring musician and an avid record collector, I know owners of independent record shops in every major city in the Western world, you know, on a first-name basis. Because I come in there every year or two and buy a lot of records and have a great big chat and all that stuff. And so they know that I'm aware of a lot of things in a lot of different places, and that I have enthusiasm for things, and that I like to help people. So I can say to them, hey, you know, I just heard this band, Cars and Cars, or whoever. I think, you know, the people who come into your shop to buy records are going to want this. And they're like, okay, yeah, give us 5 copies, you know. Okay, great. And then, you know, they call me, yeah, it's a week later, yeah, well, we played it in the shop, and yeah, they're all gone now, so we need more. So, you know, if I get that happening in New York, and I get that happening in Chicago, and I get that happening in Seattle, and I get that happening in London, I get that happening in Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, you know, all around, and suddenly you raise this cognizance of something that's inherently mysterious and, you know, mystifying, because it has this impenetrable layer, because it's from another culture and it's in another language for the most part. So you'll never be able to get your head around it unless you become a fluent Mandarin speaker and go live in China for a long period of time and sort of become a part of the culture and the mindset, collective mindset, because the way things are happening there, you know, it's very different to here. So yeah, they've got a different kind of logic and value system, which is going to aid them and serve them well into the future. Beijing, China, right now, is very similar to the West in the late 1950s. In the late 1950s, what you had was parents not wanting to let their daughter go see, you know, Gene Vincent or whoever it was, because they know that little Amy Sue's not going to come back the same little innocent girl she was when she went out that night. She's going to come home being a young lady and not a little girl, right? Because she's been cultured, or whatever you want to call it. So, you know, there's an element of danger, an element of unpredictability, an element of this is too hot to handle and I'm afraid to find out where it's headed. So we haven't had that in the West. for a very long time. The last thing that really did that I can think of is hip-hop, strangely enough, because it really rattled the establishment's cage. And you know, the NWA movie, whether you liked them or that kind of music or not, it's the fucking #1 movie in America for weeks, man. That's an impact, okay? So, and that shit is from the fucking streets. That's straight up from the ghettos. It's from a place where if you were walking down the street, you would probably get in some kind of trouble. So, you know, that's the last thing I can think of in Western culture that's really rattled people's cages in this kind of unhinging manner. Ever since then, I'm really hard pressed. It wasn't grunge, that's for sure. You know, before hip hop, it was punk rock. Before that, it was glam rock. You know, men in rock bands dressing as women, saying they're bisexual, things like that. David Bowie, Mark Bolan, it's everything. Lots of it, and most of it is superior to what I experience in the West in this day and age, certainly in the 21st century. So, yeah, it's not like a sound, it's more like or a style, it's more like a nature and intent, a headspace, a psychology. That's the common thread. Whether they're playing something that sounds, you know, derived from a Sonic Youth aesthetic, or from a Bauhaus aesthetic, or from a, you know, something that's more folk, or more experimental, they do it all, and they do it all incredibly well. And, you know, it's all infused with purpose and meaning, and therefore it's very powerful, potent stuff. You know, there's nothing, you know, innocuous about it, there's nothing insincere about it, there is no irony in what they do. See, that's the difference. In the West, people have become so cynical and jaded that everything is sort of coming, well, it's a grand sweeping statement, but a lot of things are coming from this kind of, you know, insincere, sort of ironic perspective, you know? It's not sincere. The first wave of rock music in China was in the 90s. That was the very first wave, and it was all heavy metal and punk rock. And it was all very well performed and played, but it was all quite tacky. You know, it was very sort of derived from the lowest common denominator of what the West has to offer in those genres. And the government didn't like it, they stamped it out, and everyone kind of went underground for a bit. And through that came a bit of a post-punk revolution that began pretty much at the beginning of this century. So that's something that's more rooted in, you know, the Velvet Underground, or Sonic Youth, or the Jesus and Mary Chain, My Bloody Valentine. These are just examples. Yeah, so the interesting stuff started happening in this century. And that's the only place in the world I can think of that has had anything interesting happen in this century. Because in this century, well, through the 90s in the Western world, that's when they were preparing our society for the mass homogenization of everything. So it's interesting how we all have the delusion of freedom, you know, yet we're very controlled. In China, they're expressing freedom in ways that we've forgotten how to do, actually, because we're so conservative and we're so watered down to our lowest common denominator. Streaming's fine, but when massive multi-million-dollar corporations want to profit off of streaming your music, and you essentially get nothing for it until it's been streamed 300 billion times. No, fuck that. That's bullshit. It's people waking up to how wrong it is. You know, it's not about replacing it with some other thing. It's about people waking up. You know, everyone's so worried about, you know, the problems of the world. It's like the biggest problem the world has is people. Bottom line. You know, it's like when people can wake up to that, that'll sort a lot of shit out. But I'm not holding my breath. Because people, you know, they don't want to have to think too deeply, and they, you know, they want to keep things, you know, they don't want to rock any boats. They don't want to, you know, put in any extra effort to find something out that might shit all over their logic. People live in fear. We were discussing that earlier. You know, that's the thing that prevails in the world is fear, and it stops a lot of things from happening. You know, everyone's looking for an easy way out, and you know, cutting corners. It's a cutting corners world, and that's fucking things up too. That's goes back to what I said about people are part of the problem. Everyone's looking for a fucking deal, like they're so entitled to some break. Fuck that. Get out there and work your fucking ass off and earn it. Pay what it fucking costs. Free is the most expensive. Buddha will tell you that. So, you know, when my friend calls me and says, "Oh, hey, Ricky, I just opened this really cool studio. I'll give you a bro discount." I say, "Mate, I don't want your bro discount. You know why?" "What do you mean you don't want it? We're bros." "I'll tell you why, bro. Because I don't want to be backburnered because you gave me a deal. I want you to take my shit seriously. So I'll pay you what you're worth. And I'd actually rather pay to someone who is not my friend, because that way that doesn't pollute the process. There's no coddling of egos because this is my mate and I'll upset him. I have to go to his birthday party next week or whatever. Fuck that. I'm going to hire a pro who I don't have to get along with. Who I don't have to worry about what he's going to think of me next week. But it's better for everyone. It's just real straightforward. It's clear cut. It's black and white. No bullshit.